The courtroom smelled like old paper and disinfectant, a sharp, institutional clean that never quite erased fear. Light from the high windows cut across the polished floor in pale rectangles as Alicia Monroe stepped through the double doors, her heels clicking once, too loud before stopping. A bailiff's hand shot out. "Hold it!" Alicia froze. She felt every eye turn, felt the heat of them before she saw the uniform. The officer was young, white, confident in the careless way authority often was. His gaze slid over her tailored navy suit, the leather briefcase at her side, then settled on her face with practiced suspicion. "You're not allowed beyond this point," he said. "I'm doing Courtroom 3, Alicia replied, keeping her voice steady. She reached into her bag for her credentials. The officer didn't look at them. "Ma'am, I asked you to stop." The gavel inside Courtroom 3 cracked down, sharp, final, and the sound echoed in her chest. Murmurs rippled through the hall. A clerk whispered something to another clerk. No one intervened. Alicia felt the familiar tightening behind her ribs, the calculation every black woman learned early. Comply or escalate. Breathe or break. "I am an officer of this court," she said carefully. The officer's jaw hardened. His hand closed around her wrist, metal-biting skin as cuffs snapped shut. "I don't care who you think you are," he said, leaning close enough that she smelled coffee on his breath. "You people always say that." A camera phone lifted somewhere behind her. As Alicia was turned toward the holding corridor, the courtroom doors swung open, and the judge stepped out, staring straight at her cuffs. The hall went silent. Alicia stepped into her office, the polished wood and leather chairs a stark contrast to the chaos of the courtroom. The scent of coffee mingled with paper and ink, comforting, grounding. She closed the door behind her, allowing herself a moment to exhale, though her muscles remained taut. The adrenaline from the confrontation still hummed through her veins. Her assistant Tanya was waiting, tablet in hand. Her expression was sharp, eyes wide with a mixture of concern and admiration. "I've pulled the news clips. The lobby footage is already circulating on social media," she said. "People are calling it, well, you know, an abuse of power case." Alicia asked, her tone dry, but her mind already racing through implications. She placed her briefcase on the desk, organizing the files she would need. "Good. Let them see the truth. This isn't just about me. It's about the culture that allowed it to happen." Tanya nodded. "Yes, but the headlines are framing it as a viral moment, not a systemic problem. Some people are calling the officer a rookie mistake. Others are already defending him online. It's a mess." Alicia leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. "That's exactly why this needs structure. Viral outrage fades. Evidence doesn't. Records, reports, witness statements, they last. This isn't about optics. It's about accountability." Her office door opened again. Detective Harris slipped inside, holding a folder thick with documents. "I spoke to the internal affairs team. They're opening a formal investigation. They'll review the video, interview witnesses, and assess patterns. They asked me to coordinate with you." Alicia's gaze sharpened. "Patterns? Past complaints," Harris said. "There's a trail. Minor incidents, disrespect, excessive scrutiny, often dismissed or buried." He handed her the folder. "We're looking at more than one officer. This could be bigger than you think." Alicia flipped through the papers. The names, dates, and details were strikingly familiar. Young black professionals, students, community members. Stories that mirrored hers. Stopped, questioned, belittled. Over time, the minor indignities added up, forming a lattice of institutional prejudice. "They didn't just target me," Alicia said softly. "They've been testing boundaries for years. And no one stopped them." Harris nodded grimly. "Exactly. And now the spotlight's on. But the higher-ups are nervous. They want resolution without scandal. They'll try to control the narrative." Alicia's jaw tightened. "Then we'll control it instead. Evidence, witnesses, public record. That's how systemic abuse ends, Not by hoping someone decides to act ethically, but by creating undeniable accountability. They worked in silence for a moment, the only sound the tapping of fingers on keyboards and the occasional rustle of paper. Alicia's mind wandered to the young officer, the one who had so confidently wielded his authority like a weapon. He had underestimated her, underestimated the weight of professionalism combined with lived experience. And now that miscalculation was visible, undeniable. The phone rang, breaking the silence. Alicia answered quickly. "Monroe," a deep, measured voice responded. "Ms. Monroe, this is Chief Hamilton. I saw the footage." Her body tensed. The chief of police. The very institution that had allowed the arrest to happen was now calling her. "Yes, Chief Hamilton." Her voice was steady. "Let me be clear," he said. "This conduct is unacceptable. We are reviewing it. I will personally ensure that an impartial investigation occurs." Alicia paused, weighing the words. "Chief, I appreciate that, but history suggests otherwise. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern. I need documentation, witnesses, and action, not statements." There was a pause on the line. She could hear the faint shuffle of papers. "Understood," the chief finally said. "We'll proceed accordingly. I trust your judgment, Ms. Monroe." Hanging up, Alicia exhaled slowly. She knew the chief's involvement was a double-edged sword. Authority could bring accountability, but it could also temper consequences if left unchecked. Vigilance was still required. Tanya leaned forward. "What's next?" Alicia opened a fresh folder, revealing a list of past complaints and internal reports. "Next," she said, "is a thorough review. We interview witnesses. We document every incident, every minor humiliation, every excessive stop, every ignored complaint. We trace the pattern. And then we ensure those responsible cannot hide behind bureaucracy." Her eyes fell on the officer's image in the news clips. Smug, arrogant, unaware of the storm building around him. Alicia's pulse quickened, not with anger this time, but with determination. Every system has a weakness. Every unchecked act leaves traces. She would follow them all. Harris glanced at her. "You're ready for the fallout." Alicia didn't flinch. "I've been preparing for this my whole life. The fallout is necessary. The real work begins now." For hours they worked. Names were cross-referenced, files analyzed, footage reviewed. Each piece of evidence was a brick in a larger wall of accountability. Alicia's mind kept returning to the corridor, the cuffs, the whispers, the dismissive officer. She remembered the small gestures that had accompanied every slight, leaning closer, breathing down her neck, questioning her credentials as though her authority was optional. Each moment had been documented mentally, stored for later. Now those mental notes became part of the tangible record. By mid-afternoon, the internal affairs team had begun contacting witnesses. Emails and calls buzzed through Alicia's inbox. Each response painted a clearer picture of the institutional culture that had allowed the harassment to occur. The more she read, the more apparent the scope became. This was not a singular lapse in judgment but a system that tolerated bias, rewarded aggression, and dismissed those who challenged it. Harris spoke quietly, almost reverently, as he reviewed another statement. "They've all been waiting for someone to take notice. You might be the first person in a long time who didn't look away." Alicia allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of her own journey. The years navigating law school, the early days as a young prosecutor facing skepticism, the microaggressions in meetings, the subtle dismissals, the overt harassment. It had all led to this precise moment. Her arrest was not merely a personal affront. It was a reflection of the system she now had the power to expose. A notification popped up on her phone. The footage had been picked up by a major news outlet. Comments and shares multiplied rapidly. Some praised her professionalism. Others questioned her authority. The mix of support and criticism was inevitable, but Alicia didn't flinch. Public scrutiny was another tool. Transparency could force accountability in ways internal reviews alone could not. Tanya leaned back, exhausted but determined. We're going to have to brace for backlash. People will take sides. Some will defend him, some will defend the system. But those who are silent now will regret it when the evidence comes out. Alicia nodded. Let them talk. Our work is documentation, verification, exposure. Everything else is noise. By late evening, the office was quiet except for the hum of computers and the occasional shuffle of papers. Alicia reviewed one final file, her eyes scanning the officer's previous records. Patterned behavior, documented incidents, dismissed complaints. The pieces aligned like a puzzle, and the picture was unmistakable. Misuse of authority fueled by bias, systemic negligence, and unchallenged assumptions. She closed the folder and leaned back. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a faint, private smile. The initial humiliation of the morning, the cuffs, the smirk, the whispered words, they were now part of a narrative she could control. Power, she thought, when abused leaves traces. And she was following every one. Harris glanced at her, nodding toward the folder. We're ready to present this formally. Alicia's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. Not ready for presentation yet, she said softly. We need witnesses, corroboration, and unassailable documentation. The officer's arrogance will be his undoing, but only if we move carefully. One mistake, and the system could protect him. They worked into the night, the office lit by the cold glow of overhead lights and screens. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that within a small office in the courthouse, a reckoning was quietly taking shape. The echoes of authority, once oppressive, were now the subject of meticulous scrutiny. Alicia allowed herself a final thought before leaving her office. Justice is slow, but it is inevitable, and when it comes it will be complete. Alicia's eyes tracked the newcomer as he stepped into the courtroom. Mid-30s, sharply dressed, and carrying an air of quiet authority. He didn't rush, he didn't hesitate. He simply stood, observing, like someone who had already seen too much and knew what to do with it. The young officer's posture stiffened immediately. His smirk was gone, replaced by an instinctive defensiveness. His hand hovered near his belt, not touching it, but the gesture spoke volumes. He had been confident, untouchable, and now that certainty was eroding before the gaze of someone who didn't need to assert authority, they simply radiated it. Alicia's pulse quickened. Something about this man felt pivotal. She recognized that subtle energy instantly. The presence of someone who could tilt the balance, someone who would not look away. The judge cleared his throat. Detective Harris, thank you for coming on such short notice. Harris inclined his head slightly, eyes sweeping over the courtroom, resting momentarily on the officer before settling on Alicia. Your Honor, he said, voice steady. I came as soon as I could. I've reviewed the footage from the lobby. The officer shifted nervously. I was. You were abusing authority, Harris interrupted, calm but firm. We all saw it. His eyes met Alicia's for a moment, a silent reassurance. She exhaled, a small relief washing through her. She wasn't alone. The courtroom murmurs grew louder. Spectators whispered, exchanged glances. Phones were lifted, cameras angled. The corridor's whispers had found new life here. Power was no longer unilateral. The air had shifted. Alicia flexed her wrists slightly, testing the lingering soreness from the cuffs. The memory of the officer's words, "You people always say that," still burned, a cold, sharp reminder of what she had endured. She swallowed, forcing herself to maintain composure. Anger was necessary but calculated. Now was the moment for strategy, not fury. Judge Reynolds nodded. Detective, if you would, present your evidence. Harris stepped forward, laying a tablet on the bench. The screen flickered to life, showing grainy but unmistakable footage of Alicia's arrest. Every gesture, every word from the officer was visible. The smug smile, the unnecessary aggression, the dismissal of her credentials. The young officer's eyes darted from the screen to the judge, then back to Alicia. He tried to speak, to defend himself, But the footage was damning. Words failed him, leaving only the tense, defensive posture of someone unprepared for accountability. Alicia felt a rush of vindication, tempered by a simmering anger. This wasn't simply about proving a point, it was about exposing systemic failure, about making the institution see that the law must apply equally. The cuffs had been a statement, the power grab a test of dominance. And now the world could see it. A clerk whispered to another, "I can't believe he did that to her." Alicia heard it. The recognition, small as it was, mattered. Even in the sterile formality of the courtroom, truth had a way of piercing through layers of hierarchy and bias. Judge Reynolds leaned forward. "Officer, do you have any explanation for this behavior?" The officer swallowed hard. His voice was quieter now, trembling with something close to shame, or perhaps fear. I thought she was. It looked suspicious." Suspicious. The word left the judge's lips like steel. She was a prosecutor entering her own courtroom. That is not suspicious. That is professional conduct. And you, by detaining her, have violated not just her rights, but the trust placed in your office. Alicia kept her hands folded on her lap, eyes steady. She felt the room's tension tighten around her like a rope, yet she didn't flinch. This was the moment she had trained for her entire career, confronting misuse of power without being consumed by it. The officer's gaze flicked toward her, a faint flicker of defiance struggling to survive amidst dawning realization. I didn't mean. You didn't mean to uphold the law, or you didn't mean to respect it." Judge Reynolds cut him off sharply. Silence fell, punctuated only by the soft hum of the overhead lights and the occasional shuffle of papers. The courtroom was a crucible now, testing the integrity of everyone present. Alicia felt a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. This was the beginning, not the end. The consequences would ripple, and she would be the one to ensure they did. Detective Harris cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I recommend an internal review. This officer's actions weren't isolated. They reflect a broader pattern of misconduct that needs immediate attention." Murmurs spread through the room again. People were listening. People were witnessing. And in that witness, in that attention, Alicia found an ember of hope. The young officer shifted on his feet, looking around as if the walls themselves were closing in. He avoided her eyes now, staring at the floor. For the first time the balance of power had shifted. He was no longer the sole arbiter of authority. He was being judged publicly, and there was no easy escape. Alicia's phone buzzed again, a text from her assistant. "News crews outside. They've got footage. This is going viral." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she watched the officer's reaction. The tension in his shoulders, the slight quiver in his jaw. The calculated arrogance that had carried him into the corridor was evaporating. And she realized with a quiet intensity that this was the kind of justice she sought. Not fantasy, not vengeance, but exposure and accountability. Judge Reynolds tapped his gavel lightly. "The matter will be referred to the Internal Affairs Division immediately. Ms. Monroe, you may continue your duties while the investigation proceeds. Detective Harris, thank you for your prompt action." Alicia rose, her legs steady, her body reclaiming the authority that had been questioned only an hour before. She felt the eyes of the courtroom on her, some curious, some apologetic, others shocked. She allowed herself a small, controlled exhale. But even as relief began to creep in, a new awareness took hold. This young officer's actions were not isolated. They were symptomatic. Patterns. Embedded biases. Prejudices codified into daily interactions. Minor humiliations that often went unnoticed but built into systemic oppression. The fight was far from over. Detective Harris fell into step beside her as they exited the courtroom. "You handled that well," he said quietly, careful not to draw attention from the spectators lingering in the hall. Alicia gave a small nod. "It's not about me. It's about what happens next, ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else." Harris glanced at her, recognition in his eyes. "And it won't." Not with you watching. The hallway stretched ahead, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows. Cameras clicked, phones recorded. Social media would explode. Headlines would carry the story. But Alicia felt no triumph, only a sharp clarity. Justice required diligence, persistence, and courage, not the fleeting satisfaction of seeing someone falter. She reached into her bag, smoothing the papers inside her briefcase. Each file, each report, each motion was a weapon in the larger fight against abuse. And now she had evidence, witnesses, and the law on her side. The battle had shifted from immediate survival to systemic challenge. As they walked, the young officer remained behind, flanked by senior colleagues, his face pale, jaw tight, every motion betraying unease. Alicia allowed herself a small, private smirk. The balance had shifted. The game had changed. And yet, a lingering question remained. How far would the consequences ripple? How many layers of systemic prejudice would unravel once this exposure began? The answer was unknown, but Alicia was prepared to follow it, relentlessly, without compromise. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, steady and deliberate. The fight had only just begun. The holding corridor smelled faintly of bleach and metal. Alicia's wrists throbbed where the cuffs bit into her skin. She kept her head high, every muscle taut, as if the mere posture could shield her from the humiliation. Around her, other officers moved with brisk indifference. No one questioned the arrest. No one offered a nod of understanding. It was as though her presence there, her blackness, her certainty, her professionalism, made her a spectacle that the institution could ignore with impunity. She tried to focus on her breathing, on counting the seconds between each step, but the whispers and stifled snickers were relentless. "Must have done something wrong," someone muttered behind her. Another voice added, "That's what happens when they think they belong." The words were meant to be private, but in the tight corridor, sound traveled, carrying with it the weight of centuries of expectation and prejudice. "Ma'am," said an officer at the holding desk, glancing at the cuffed hands, "we need to verify your ID." His tone was polite, almost rehearsed, yet the subtle edge carried the assumption she was lying. She handed over her credentials, embossed with the seal of the district attorney's office, fully aware that in another context, this should have ended the conversation immediately. Instead, the officer squinted, scanning her ID as if it were a novelty. "District what?" His voice betrayed incredulity. "I am the chief prosecutor for this district," Alicia said evenly. Every word weighed. She could hear her own pulse. The hall felt suddenly colder, the sterile fluorescent light harsh against her dark skin. The officer laughed, a short, dismissive bark. "Yeah, right. You expect me to believe that?" Her stomach tightened. She knew this was no misunderstanding. This was deliberate, a test of power, an assertion that the law applied to her differently. A part of her wanted to flare, to yell, to demand respect. But years of navigating these spaces had taught her the careful arithmetic of survival. A door opened at the far end of the corridor. Another officer appeared, this one older, more deliberate in his movements. He looked at the scene with an almost imperceptible frown. "What's going on here?" The young officer straightened, a forced smile on his face. "Just verifying her credentials, sir. Routine." The older man's eyes lingered on Alicia for a long moment. "I see." There was no apology, no acknowledgement, just a dismissive nod, as if her presence had disrupted the natural order. The older officer walked away, leaving the young officer smirking slightly. Alicia's phone buzzed in her bag. She reached for it, but the cuffs made it awkward. The screen lit up with a text from Detective Harris, a trusted colleague. "Saw the news alert. Are you okay?" She typed back quickly, fingers shaking slightly. "I'm fine. But this isn't a mistake. It's targeted." The young officer snatched the phone from her hand. "Don't start texting from in here. Rules are rules." He laughed at his own authority, and the sound grated against her nerves like nails on metal. Minutes stretched. Each tick of the wall clock was a hammer against her sense of order. Other detainees shuffled past in the corridor, some bewildered, some angry, some resigned. Their eyes met hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement of shared experience. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself not to meet their pity or their fear. Finally, an officer approached, a clipboard in hand. "You'll be held here until the judge reviews your case," he said. His tone was careful, professional, but she could sense the undercurrent. This isn't about the law. This is about control. Alicia's mind raced. She ran through her options, each one a precarious calculation. Filing a complaint might provoke retaliation. Public exposure could backfire. Challenging the officer directly in front of witnesses might escalate into violence. Yet sitting silently was unbearable. Her entire career had been built on standing firm in the face of injustice. Now, the very system she had served had turned against her. A sound cut through her thoughts, the dull, final thud of a gavel from the courtroom beyond. She flinched. The moment felt symbolic. The very law she represented, the authority she wielded every day, now rendered powerless in the hands of someone untrained in justice, motivated only by bias. A knock at the door startled her. "Alicia Monroe," a voice called from outside. She recognized it immediately. Judge Reynolds, her longtime ally and mentor. Relief and tension warred inside her chest. She pressed her back against the wall as the door opened. "Officer, please remove the cuffs," the judge commanded. The young officer hesitated, a faint smirk playing at his lips. "Sir," she was. "Remove the cuffs," Judge Reynolds said. His voice icy now, sharpened by authority. He stepped aside, letting Alicia enter. Inside the courtroom, the air felt charged, almost electric. The judge's eyes met hers, a silent apology passing between them. Whispers rustled in the benches as spectators sensed the tension. Alicia straightened her shoulders, every inch the prosecutor she was known to be, despite the indignities of the past hour. The young officer lingered at the door, awkward, uncertain now. His smirk had faded into something tighter, almost defensive. She noticed the subtle shift, the first crack in the armor of assumed power. "You're the chief prosecutor," he stammered, voice low now, almost incredulous. "I am," Alicia said, voice calm but cutting. Every syllable carried the weight of her experience, of years spent demanding accountability. "And you have just arrested me without cause. That's not just a mistake, it's a crime. Do you understand?" He looked down, shifting uneasily. The hall was quiet except for the occasional cough, the rustle of papers. Spectators whispered, their attention snapping between the confrontation and the courtroom ritual unfolding. Alicia felt her pulse steady. She had faced prejudice before. She had endured microaggressions, overt discrimination, and systemic barriers. But this was audacious in its arrogance. And it would not go unanswered. Judge Reynolds gestured toward the bench. "We'll address this immediately. Take a seat, Ms. Monroe. We'll resolve this." Alicia's eyes scanned the room, noting the reactions of clerks, spectators, and even the other officers. The young officer's gaze flicked away, avoiding hers, a faint flush creeping across his neck. She allowed herself the smallest, controlled exhale. Yet even as she sat, she knew this was only the beginning. The arrest had been deliberate, the humiliation orchestrated. The question now was how far it would go, and how she would respond. Justice was her life's work. And now, more than ever, she would wield it not just as a prosecutor, but as a witness to abuse, as a black woman who had seen the law bend under the weight of prejudice. Her briefcase was at her feet. She opened it, fingers brushing over the papers, files, and notes she always kept close. The gavel echoed again, sharp, definitive, a reminder that rules existed for everyone, even those who tried to bend them. Outside the courtroom, whispers of cameras and phone recordings lingered in the hall. Somewhere, someone had captured the moment, and she sensed that it would not remain contained. Her story, and the story of the young officer's misuse of authority, was already beginning to ripple outward. Alicia's mind, ever calculating, already plotted the next moves. Complaints, investigations, public statements, legal avenues. Each option was a tool, each one a step toward exposing the abuse she had endured. And in that moment, as she adjusted her jacket and smoothed her hair, she allowed herself a private, fierce thought. They can't silence me. Not now. Not ever. The courtroom doors swung open again. A new figure appeared, someone she did not recognize, and the young officer's expression changed completely. There was a flicker of fear, confusion, the kind that only comes when the carefully constructed hierarchy of power starts to crumble. Alicia caught her first glimpse of the new arrival, a potential witness, ally or adversary, and felt the chill of anticipation run down her spine. Whatever came next, she knew one thing: the game had changed, and the first move was hers. The next morning, Alicia returned to the courthouse before dawn. The city outside was still muted, the streets glistening from last night's rain. Inside, the building hummed with quiet activity. Security officers walking their rounds, custodians moving silently with their carts, the faint click of heels on marble floors. The courthouse had always felt like a sanctuary of order to her. Today, it felt like a battlefield. Detective Harris met her at the elevator. "I've arranged interviews with past witnesses," he said, tablet in hand. "Some of them are hesitant, fear of retaliation, but they know you're on their side." Alicia nodded. "That's why we do this carefully. One misstep, and the system protects the abuser instead of exposing him." She adjusted her blazer, letting the leather briefcase hang from her shoulder like armor. Their first interview was with Tasha Freeman, a young attorney who had once been stopped by the same officer under suspicious circumstances. Tasha's hands shook slightly as she recounted the encounter, but her words were clear, precise. "He questioned me, my credentials, everything," she said. "It wasn't just a stop. It was a performance, like he wanted someone to watch him humiliate me." Alicia listened, taking notes. Every detail mattered. The gestures, the tone, the environment. Each account formed a lattice of corroboration that no single officer could dismiss. "Did anyone else witness this?" Alicia asked. Tasha nodded. "Yes, a clerk and a security guard. They didn't intervene. I think they were scared." "Thank you, Tasha. You did the right thing by coming forward," Alicia said. She watched the relief wash over the young attorney's face. Small victories mattered. Each witness was a stone in the foundation of accountability. Next was Marcus Bell, a community organizer who had endured multiple stops at courthouse entrances, questioned relentlessly about innocuous paperwork. He recounted the encounters with visible frustration, his voice rising in places, punctuated by pauses for breath. "It wasn't about security or procedure," he said, leaning forward. "It was about proving I didn't belong here. He wanted to remind us that we're always under scrutiny." Alicia nodded silently, her pen moving across pages. Each story repeated a familiar pattern. The officer wielding authority like a weapon, unchecked, and unchecked compliance from the surrounding staff. The system had allowed this behavior to exist, unchallenged, for years. Harris stepped back, letting her work. "This is bigger than we thought," he murmured. "We're not just dealing with a single rogue officer. This is cultural." Alicia's jaw tightened. Cultural bias embedded in a system that was supposed to protect, not punish. That was the real enemy. One officer could be disciplined, removed even, but changing the culture required exposure, persistence, and meticulous documentation. By midday, they had interviewed 6 witnesses. Each account added weight, each narrative confirming the pattern. Alicia's notes were becoming a map of systematic abuse, showing how microaggressions, dismissals, and public humiliations had escalated into blatant misuse of power. Harris glanced at the growing stack of files. "We're going to need a formal report. Internal Affairs will want it, but this should also go to the DA's office directly. And we need to include the video, cross-reference statements, timelines." Alicia leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. We'll do it in phases. First, formal documentation. Second, witness corroboration. Third, legal review for accountability. By the time this reaches the higher-ups, the narrative is ours. There's no room for spin. They moved next to the office of Samuel Ortiz, a clerk who had observed multiple incidents in the lobby. Samuel was nervous, fidgeting with his ID badge. Alicia approached slowly, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Ortiz, thank you for meeting with us. I know it's uncomfortable, but your perspective is critical. We need to know exactly what happened." He exhaled. "I've seen a lot," he admitted finally. "I didn't say anything because I didn't want trouble. I thought it wasn't my place. But, this morning, that was wrong. Arresting her like that." His eyes widened as he gestured toward the memory. "She's the chief prosecutor. That's not just wrong, it's dangerous. It could happen to anyone." Alicia nodded, feeling the weight of truth. Each individual who spoke was a brick in the structure she was building, a structure that could withstand the attempts to minimize, dismiss, or spin the story. Every hesitation, every act of courage added legitimacy. "Thank you, Samuel. You've done the right thing," she said. She noted his name carefully, every hesitation, every glance recorded. Witness credibility was essential. After the interviews, Alicia and Harris returned to her office. The evidence they had collected was staggering, not just for the single officer's misconduct, but for the culture it represented. Reports, video clips, witness statements, patterns of complaint. It painted a picture of systemic failure that was undeniable. Alicia set the files down and exhaled. "We're building more than a case against one person," she said. "We're exposing a system that has tolerated bias, intimidation, and abuse. That's bigger than any one officer. That's institutional failure." Harris nodded. "And the public? They'll need context. Social media will take fragments and spin them. They need to see the full pattern." "Yes," Alicia said, voice firm. "The story has to be comprehensive. Not just outrage, not just one viral moment. We'll show them the whole structure, the cumulative effect, and the real consequences. It's the only way change happens." They worked into the evening, compiling the first draft of a formal report, cross-referencing every incident with video evidence and witness statements. Alicia's attention to detail was meticulous. Every date, every interaction, every subtle gesture was accounted for. As the office quieted, Alicia leaned back in her chair. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Exposing patterns, documenting bias, preparing for legal challenges. It was a marathon, not a sprint. But she had a strategy now, a path forward. And she knew the officer would not escape scrutiny this time. Her phone buzzed again, a news alert. Viral video. Prosecutor arrested in courthouse, investigation underway. Alicia read the headline, noting the framing. The video had gone public, and while many focused on the spectacle, she knew the deeper story. The systematic harassment, the unchecked authority, the structural bias that allowed it. She turned to Harris. "This is just the beginning. Public attention is fleeting, but evidence isn't. We hold the record, we hold the truth. That's how accountability happens." Harris smiled faintly. "And that's why we're working late." Alicia allowed herself a small, private smile. The work was grueling, exhausting, emotionally taxing, but it was necessary. Every statement, every piece of evidence, every witness who had the courage to speak up was a step toward justice. She glanced at the stack of files one last time before standing. The city outside had darkened, the courthouse quieting as evening settled. But inside, a reckoning was underway. And Alicia, resolute and focused, would see it through. Justice is not instantaneous. She reminded herself silently. It's persistent. It's relentless. And it will come. And with that, she closed her briefcase, ready for whatever the next day would bring. By morning, the courthouse was buzzing in a way Alicia had never experienced. News vans lined the street outside, microphones poised for statements. Pedestrians paused on the sidewalks, their phones lifted, capturing the architecture of justice as it became the architecture of scandal. The arrest footage had gone viral overnight, headlines blaring across screens. Chief Prosecutor arrested in courthouse. Police misconduct under investigation. Alicia moved through the hallways with deliberate calm, heels clicking against the marble, eyes alert. Reporters had been corralled, cameras rolling, but the courthouse staff treated her with cautious respect. This was her domain, and today she owned it. Detective Harris met her near the elevators. "The viral attention is massive," he said, checking his tablet. "Calls from the press, social media, comments, discussions. It's everywhere. People are framing it as spectacle, but we have control over the facts." "Control the facts," Alicia echoed. "Not the narrative. People will sensationalize. That's fine. We just need the undeniable evidence to speak for itself." They reached the DA's office, where Alicia's team had begun compiling a public statement for review. She glanced over the draft. Concise, factual, emphasizing accountability, transparency, and procedural correctness. Every word was deliberate. Public trust was fragile. Manipulation or misstep could undo all the work they had done. Her phone buzzed again. "Chief Hamilton." She answered immediately. "Ms. Monroe," the chief said, voice careful, measured. "We need your cooperation. The investigation must proceed without disruption. I trust you understand the stakes." "I do," Alicia said, her tone unwavering. "And I also trust that the department recognizes that this isn't about protecting image. It's about enforcing accountability. Any attempt to manipulate evidence or dismiss complaints will be noticed." There was a pause on the line, almost imperceptible, before the chief replied, "Understood." Alicia hung up, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and vigilance. Even authority could be pressured if approached methodically. She turned to Harris. "The spotlight is ours to illuminate, not ours to manipulate. Facts, evidence, witnesses. That's the only path forward." Their first public step was a press briefing, coordinated to outline the investigation's parameters without compromising witness confidentiality or ongoing procedures. Alicia stood at the podium, the courthouse behind her, cameras catching every word. "Earlier this week, I was detained in this building without cause," Alicia began, voice firm, commanding attention. "This event is not isolated. Internal reviews have revealed multiple incidents of misconduct by this officer, reflecting patterns of improper behavior. I am committed to ensuring that all allegations are investigated thoroughly, transparently, and impartially." The microphones captured every word. Reporters scribbled notes, snapped photos, and whispered among themselves. Alicia allowed a pause, letting the weight of her statement sink in. "The justice system must uphold accountability for everyone, including those who wield authority," she continued. "No one is above the law, and no abuse of power will go unchecked." A wave of murmurs and camera clicks rippled through the crowd. Some reporters nodded, others scribbled furiously. Social media would dissect her words within minutes. But she didn't flinch. This was not performative. This was procedural, precise, unassailable. After the briefing, Alicia returned to her office. Harris joined her, both of them reviewing the witness statements again. "The officer's story is starting to crack," he said quietly. "Internal complaints, corroborating witnesses, video evidence. It's all adding up. The higher-ups are starting to pay attention." Alicia nodded. "Good. But attention isn't accountability. We need formal charges, consequences, and structural reform. The spotlight alone isn't enough." The officer's first ripple of consequence appeared in the form of an official notice: suspension pending internal affairs review. It was procedural, but symbolically it was seismic. The smirk that had carried him through the corridors vanished, replaced by tension and uncertainty. Alicia reviewed the document carefully. Every word mattered. She noted the timing, the language, and the procedural adherence. "Harris, this is a start," she said. "But we track everything. Every step, every motion. Any deviation from procedure or attempt to protect him will be immediately addressed." Hours later, the courthouse quieted, though the digital world outside roared. News outlets dissected the arrest. Editorials debated the officer's conduct. Social media threads exploded with commentary, some supporting her, others attempting to discredit. Alicia ignored the noise. Evidence and procedure were her armor. A sharp knock on her office door broke her concentration. She looked up to see Samuel Ortiz, the clerk, hesitating in the doorway. "Ms. Monroe." "I have something," he said. He held a folder, fingers trembling. "What is it, Samuel?" Alicia asked, gesturing for him to come in. "I kept records, incidents I've observed over the years," he admitted. "Minor complaints, small notes, some emails I saved. I wasn't sure if it mattered. But seeing what happened to you, I realized it does." Alicia took the folder carefully. "Everything matters. Patterns matter. Thank you for stepping forward." He exhaled, relief and anxiety mingling on his face. "I just hope it helps." "It will," she said, voice firm. "This is the proof we need. Every small act contributes to the whole picture." By late evening, the compiled files had grown heavier, a testament to years of systemic misconduct, the documentation of which could no longer be ignored. Alicia reviewed the patterns. Stops, interrogations, dismissals, and microaggressions, all escalating to overt abuse. The system had allowed this officer's arrogance to flourish unchecked, but now each action had left a paper trail, video record, and witness testimony. Harris leaned back in his chair, exhaustion evident in his posture. "He can't weasel out of this. Not now. The evidence is airtight." Alicia's eyes were steady. "It's airtight for the misconduct, yes. But changing a system is never simple. There are layers, protections, politics. We must remain vigilant. The officer's downfall is only the first step." A notification popped up on her tablet. An email from Internal Affairs confirming receipt of all documentation and scheduled interviews with additional witnesses. The bureaucratic machinery was turning, slowly but inevitably. Alicia leaned back, feeling the first true sense of progress since the morning of her arrest. But even in the glow of advancement, she knew this was only the beginning. Public exposure had forced accountability, but systemic change required persistence, vigilance, and courage from every participant. Her gaze drifted to the courthouse steps, bathed in the late afternoon sun. Outside, journalists and bystanders lingered, capturing the building as it became the stage for both spectacle and justice. Alicia allowed herself a private thought, sharp and unflinching. Power leaves traces. And those traces are what bring accountability. As the day ended, she closed her files carefully, stacking them like building blocks for a case that was no longer just about one officer, but about the entire culture that had enabled him. The lights in her office dimmed, but Alicia's determination did not. Spotlight how the D turned. And now, those who had wielded unchecked authority were on notice. The following morning, the courthouse felt different. The usual calm, methodical rhythm of early arrivals and clerked cases had shifted. Whispers followed Alicia as she walked through the lobby. Acknowledgement, speculation, even cautious admiration. Her presence now carried weight beyond her title. She had become a living testament to accountability, to resilience in the face of systemic abuse. Detective Harris caught up with her near the elevators. "The officer requested to meet with Internal Affairs today," he said quietly, a slight edge of satisfaction in his voice. "They're reviewing his statements before the interviews with other witnesses begin. He's anxious." Alicia's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Anxiety was the first visible crack in someone who had wielded power without consequence for so long. "Good," she said softly. "Let him feel it. The system will do what the law allows. But this is his first taste of exposure." The first interview with Internal Affairs was scheduled mid-morning. Alicia and Harris observed discreetly from a nearby room, watching the officer, young, white, and once confident, sit opposite two seasoned investigators. His hands fidgeted with his belt, a nervous tic that betrayed a lifetime of assumed invulnerability. The lead investigator cleared his throat. Officer Matthews, you are here to discuss multiple allegations of misconduct, including the recent incident involving Chief Prosecutor Alicia Monroe. Do you understand the gravity of these allegations? Matthews swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. Yes, he said, voice barely above a whisper. You have the right to respond to each claim truthfully and accurately. Any attempt to mislead this investigation may result in additional charges, the investigator continued. His tone was measured, professional, leaving no room for obfuscation. Alicia's pulse quickened as she observed silently. Every hesitation, every defensive gesture Matthews made would be scrutinized. He had once operated under the assumption that authority shielded him. Now that illusion was eroding. As the questioning progressed, his defensiveness became palpable. I didn't mean any harm, he stammered. I was just following protocol. I thought she was suspicious. Suspicious? The investigator interrupted sharply. She is the chief prosecutor. She is authorized to be in this building. You did not have cause to detain her. Matthew's face paled. He opened his mouth, then closed it, swallowing, his earlier arrogance dissolving into uncertainty. The investigators pressed further, reviewing footage, witness statements, and prior complaints. Patterns emerged. Minor incidents, yes, but cumulative, consistent, and troubling. From the observation room, Alicia could see the shift. The young officer's posture sagged. The practiced mask of authority cracked. He had misjudged every aspect of the situation. The power of documentation, the reach of witnesses, the inevitability of accountability. Harris leaned close, whispering, "This is what happens when arrogance meets evidence." Alicia's lips pressed into a thin line. It's not just evidence. It's pattern recognition. The system sees what he cannot deny. Hours later the session ended. Matthews was escorted out, his gait stiff, his confidence visibly diminished. Alicia allowed herself a small nod of satisfaction. Justice, methodical and procedural, was in motion. But she knew the fight wasn't over. Internal culture could resist, colleagues could intervene to protect him, and higher-ups could attempt damage control. Change was never linear. Progress was measured in persistence, not a single victory. By mid-afternoon, Alicia returned to her office. Her inbox was flooded with inquiries from media, colleagues, and community members. Some sought commentary, others reassurance. Her statements from the previous day had sparked national attention, but she ignored the noise, focusing instead on compiling additional evidence and preparing for the next phase. Structural accountability. Harris approached with a folder. Additional witnesses have come forward overnight, he said. More documentation of minor and major incidents. They're all consistent. The officer's history is extensive. Alicia flipped through the pages, each name, each incident reinforcing the systemic nature of the problem. We're building more than a case against him, she said. We're exposing the culture that allowed him to operate without challenge. Harris nodded. And the higher-ups? Are they responding? Alicia's eyes hardened. They're cautious. Some want to protect the institution. Others want to mitigate scandal. That's why documentation, witnesses, and procedure are critical. We can't rely on goodwill. We rely on record, evidence, and law. The rest of the day was consumed with interviews, cross-referencing complaints, and preparing timelines. Each incident, the improper questioning of young attorneys, the dismissive gestures toward clerks, the unchecked microaggressions, formed a chain, unbroken and undeniable. The network of misconduct was wider than Matthew's single act. It was systemic, woven into daily routines, institutionalized and dangerous. By evening, Alicia and Harris reviewed the compiled report. The evidence was exhaustive. Video footage, witness statements, internal emails, and historical complaints. Each element reinforced the next, a chain impossible to deny or minimize. Alicia exhaled, a rare moment of reflection breaking through her focus. Harris broke the silence. You're building a case that's not just about Matthews. It's about reform, about accountability, about setting a precedent. This could change how the courthouse operates. Alicia nodded slowly. It has to. If one officer can act with impunity for so long, it means the system protects misconduct. Exposure alone isn't enough. We need systemic change, procedural reform, and visible consequences. Her eyes fell on the officer's image from the viral video. The arrogance, the dismissive smirk, the casual assertion of unchecked power. All gone now. Anxiety, tension, uncertainty. Humanizing in a way that underscored vulnerability. She thought of the witnesses who had stepped forward, of colleagues who had once been hesitant, of the small acts of courage that collectively created momentum. Justice, she realized, was cumulative. Each step, each voice, each record mattered. The phone buzzed again. Another news alert. The officer had been officially suspended, and Internal Affairs had scheduled follow-up interviews with all witnesses from the viral incident. Social media was alight with discussion. Public scrutiny, once fleeting, was now focused, precise, and unrelenting. Alicia allowed herself a small, private thought. The spotlight is not enough, but it is necessary. It forces accountability where apathy once ruled. Later, as she prepared to leave the office, she noticed a young attorney lingering outside her office door. He hesitated, then stepped forward. "Ms. Monroe, I just wanted to thank you," he said quietly, "for standing up, for all of us. What happened to you? It could have been any of us." Alicia smiled faintly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "And that's why we act. So the next person doesn't have to endure the same thing. Courage builds momentum. One act of accountability sparks another." The young attorney nodded, relief and admiration in his eyes. Alicia watched him leave, then turned back to her office, the files stacked neatly on her desk, a testament to persistence, diligence, and the careful accumulation of truth. As she exited the courthouse, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the marble steps. Reporters and cameras lingered, waiting, observing, documenting. Alicia walked steadily, heels clicking, eyes forward. She knew the fight wasn't over. There would be backlash, resistance, and attempts to diminish her work. But now the system had evidence it could not ignore. Matthew's smirk had faded. The cracks in his armor were visible. Inside, the courthouse continued its rhythm, unaware that systemic accountability had begun. Outside, the city buzzed, the story spreading, conversations igniting, and social media channels dissecting every word and image. Change, slow and deliberate, had been set into motion. And for Alicia, the realization was simple and sharp. Exposure was only the beginning. Persistence, vigilance, and unwavering commitment to justice would define the next chapters of this fight. She paused on the steps, looking back at the courthouse, the sunlight catching the edges of the building. The lessons of the past, the humiliation, the injustice, the indifference, had forged her resolve. No abuse of power goes unchecked forever, she thought. And when it falls, it will fall completely. A shadow moved near the entrance. Matthews, flanked by a lawyer, paused to glance toward her. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The arrogance was gone. In its place, uncertainty, fear. The realization that every action he had taken, every unchecked step, had left him exposed. Alicia felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that systemic change was never easy, never immediate. But she had started the process. And sometimes that was all that was required to shift the momentum irreversibly. By the morning of Chapter 8, the courthouse felt transformed. The corridors, once merely a place of daily routine, were now charged with anticipation, scrutiny, and subtle tension. Staff whispered in corners, exchanging glances that betrayed a mix of relief, curiosity, and apprehension. The viral footage had made its way into every office, every newsroom, and every local news broadcast. Alicia walked through the halls with measured calm, her briefcase in hand, aware of the weight her presence carried. Detective Harris met her at the entrance, holding a thick folder of new developments. "Internal Affairs has escalated," he said quietly. The officer is now facing multiple formal complaints. They're reviewing disciplinary action, and there's discussion of criminal charges related to abuse of authority. Alicia nodded, steeling herself. Good. But escalation alone doesn't ensure accountability. We need transparency, documentation, and systemic acknowledgement of patterns. Otherwise, this becomes another temporary spectacle. Inside her office, Alicia reviewed additional witness statements. Each recounted events that painted a vivid picture of ongoing harassment, misuse of authority, and institutional complacency. What struck her most was the consistency. The gestures, the tone, the small humiliations that had escalated into overt abuse. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a culture that tolerated bias, and now the web of evidence was inescapable. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from the chief of police. Internal review progressing. Expect public briefing tomorrow. Your role is crucial. Ensure accuracy and clarity. Alicia's lips pressed together. Clarity would be the weapon against spin, and accuracy the shield against obfuscation. She glanced at Harris. Prepare the consolidated report for review. Cross-reference every complaint, every video, every witness statement. Nothing can be missing or misaligned. The afternoon was consumed by meetings with internal affairs, her legal team, and media consultants. Each session was meticulous, emphasizing facts over emotion, evidence over rhetoric. Alicia's strategy was clear. The story must be undeniable. Public attention alone was fleeting, but systemic reform required careful documentation and exposure. By late afternoon, the first signs of Matthew's unraveling became visible. Internal memos leaked to the press, anonymous but credible. The headlines shifted from general outrage to focused scrutiny. Officer under multiple investigations. Pattern of misconduct emerges. Social media buzzed with discussion, outrage, and commentary. The officer's once confident online persona faltered. Posts vanished, defenses crumbled, and whispers about internal protection began to circulate. Alicia remained composed, watching the process with deliberate detachment. Public exposure was a tool, but evidence was the weapon that ensured accountability. She reviewed each new development, analyzing patterns, confirming facts, and preparing for inevitable pushback. Late in the day, she received a call from Samuel Ortiz, the clerk who had provided critical documentation. Ms. Monroe, I think more people want to come forward, he said. His voice tentative but determined. Some staff have been keeping records but were afraid to speak. Now they see action. Good, Alicia said firmly. Fear has no place in justice. Encourage them to document everything and submit it formally. Every record strengthens the case. Meanwhile, Matthews had begun to fracture under pressure. Internal affairs interviews revealed contradictions, hesitations, and inconsistencies in his recollection of events. The facade of authority he had relied upon for years was dissolving, replaced by a visible tension, fear, and disorientation. Each new piece of evidence further exposed his pattern of misconduct, leaving him vulnerable not just professionally, but legally and publicly. Alicia observed this unraveling with a mixture of satisfaction and solemnity. The objective was not humiliation. It was accountability. Every error, every documented act of misconduct, every corroborated witness statement was a step toward justice. Not revenge, but restoration of integrity within the system. By evening, the first formal internal report was finalized. It detailed patterns of harassment, abuse of authority, and systemic negligence. Every act was contextualized, every incident corroborated, and every witness verified. Alicia reviewed it line by line, ensuring clarity, accuracy, and precision. The document was exhaustive, a meticulous account that could not be dismissed, minimized, or spun. Harris looked up from his notes. This will make waves. The higher-ups can't ignore it, and the public can't spin it without contradiction. It's airtight. Alicia nodded, closing the final binder with deliberate care. Yes, But airtight doesn't guarantee change. Change requires enforcement, cultural acknowledgement, and systemic reform. That's the next battle. Exposure is the first. Reform is the second. She left the office, stepping onto the courthouse steps as the evening light cast long shadows across the marble. Reporters lingered, cameras poised, microphones extended. Social media users were live-streaming the courthouse, the story unfolding in real time. Alicia allowed herself a measured acknowledgement of the attention, knowing the narrative had shifted irreversibly. Public scrutiny was no longer fleeting. It was focused and persistent. In the lobby, she encountered Tasha Freeman and Marcus Bell, two witnesses whose courage had been pivotal in documenting patterns of misconduct. "Ms. Monroe," Tasha said softly, "thank you for taking this seriously. You made it safe to speak up." Marcus nodded. "This is bigger than any one of us. But it feels like things might finally change." Alicia smiled faintly, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. Change doesn't come from hope alone. It comes from persistence, vigilance, and documented truth. Today we've ensured the first step. But tomorrow we enforce accountability. As she walked toward her car, her phone buzzed again. Another update from Internal Affairs. The officer's suspension had been extended indefinitely, and criminal inquiries were underway regarding abuse of authority and falsification of reports. The trajectory of consequences was clear, deliberate, and irreversible. Matthew's career, once untouchable, was now in jeopardy. Alicia allowed herself a brief, private exhale. But relief was tempered by awareness. Systemic issues could not be fixed with a single exposure, a single downfall. The patterns she had uncovered were embedded, and the next steps would require vigilance, advocacy, and continual enforcement. At home that evening, she reviewed the day's developments, noting the social media trends, news coverage, and internal memos. The officer's public reputation had deteriorated rapidly. His colleagues' reactions were cautious, some defensive, some anxious. Internal scrutiny was intensified, and the institution itself was on notice. Her thoughts drifted to the future. Policy reform, formal oversight, mandatory anti-bias training, strengthened internal reporting mechanisms. Exposure alone had ignited accountability, but sustainable change required structural adjustments. The courthouse, the institution she had once navigated as a professional, would now be compelled to confront its failures. Alicia's phone buzzed one final time, a simple message from Harris. "He's beginning to crack. The cracks are visible to everyone now." She smiled faintly, her resolve sharpening. The officer's facade of untouchable authority was gone. His arrogance had yielded to uncertainty, fear, and exposure. The first layer of justice had been achieved, and now the deeper work of structural accountability could proceed. As she turned off her phone and placed it on the desk, Alicia allowed herself a quiet reflection. Victory in justice was not instantaneous. It was cumulative. It was deliberate. And it required persistence, courage, and unwavering adherence to truth. Outside, the city lights twinkled, indifferent to the quiet transformation unfolding inside the courthouse. But for Alicia Monroe, the night was charged with the knowledge that accountability had begun, systemic patterns were exposed, and the unraveling of unchecked power was underway. For Matthews, the officer who had once believed his authority was absolute, the realization had set in. Power without accountability is fragile. And now, that fragility would be visible to everyone. Alicia allowed herself one final thought as she closed her eyes, preparing for the next stage of this battle. Justice is relentless, and those who misuse power will eventually face its weight. The courthouse was alive in a way Alicia had never witnessed. Cameras from national news outlets lined the steps, microphones thrust forward, reporters scribbling furiously. Outside, crowds of citizens and activists gathered, holding signs demanding accountability, their voices a chorus that resonated far beyond the courthouse walls. The viral video had transformed into a movement, and Alicia felt the weight of expectation pressing on her shoulders. Detective Harris met her near the lobby. "They're ready for your statement," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "Public and internal scrutiny are at their peak. The officer is scheduled for a formal hearing, and the press will cover it live." Alicia's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the gravity of the moment. This was the culmination of months of documentation, witness interviews, and strategic action. Today, the system would confront the consequences of unchecked authority. Inside the Internal Affairs conference room, Matthews sat across from 3 senior investigators. He was pale, his posture rigid, hands clenched into fists on the table. The smug arrogance of weeks ago was gone, replaced by tension and unease. He glanced briefly toward the door, as if hoping someone might intervene, but no one did. The lead investigator began, voice precise. "Officer Matthews, we are reviewing multiple complaints and incidents involving abuse of authority, harassment, and misconduct. Do you understand the charges against you?" "Yes," Matthews muttered, eyes darting nervously to the folders in front of him. "You will respond truthfully and provide explanations for each documented incident. Any attempt to mislead this investigation may result in criminal charges," the investigator continued. Alicia observed silently from a side room, alongside Harris and legal counsel. Every flinch, hesitation, and defensive gesture Matthews made was a window into the consequences of his actions. For the first time, authority had been removed from him, replaced by accountability and exposure. The questioning was methodical, each incident laid out with precision. Video footage, witness statements, and internal complaints were presented sequentially, showing a clear pattern of behavior. Matthews' attempts to justify or minimize were met with facts, dates, and corroborating evidence. I was following procedure," Matthews stammered, voice cracking. I didn't know." The investigator interjected calmly. "Chief Prosecutor Monroe and other witnesses have verified each event. Your prior conduct shows a repeated pattern. This is not a single error in judgment. It is systematic misconduct." Alicia's chest tightened. Watching him unravel was not satisfaction born of cruelty, but validation of months of meticulous effort. Every witness who had spoken, every document submitted, every video frame had contributed to this reckoning. By mid-morning, the hearing concluded, and Matthews was escorted from the room, his expression hollow. Outside, Alicia addressed the waiting press. She spoke deliberately, emphasizing accountability and transparency. "The events that led to my unlawful detention are not isolated," Alicia began, voice firm. "Internal investigations reveal a pattern of misconduct that the system allowed to persist unchecked. Today, the officer in question faces formal charges, and procedural reforms are underway to ensure no one experiences such abuse again." Reporters scribbled notes furiously, microphones capturing every word. Social media exploded, commentary ranging from outrage to support. The narrative had shifted irreversibly. The culture of silence was being replaced with documented accountability. Back in her office, Alicia reviewed the aftermath. Internal memos confirmed that Matthews' suspension was now indefinite, with criminal investigations initiated. Department leadership faced scrutiny for their prior inaction, and reform committees were being convened. Every move was procedural, factual, and public, precisely the accountability she had envisioned. Harris leaned against the doorway, a faint smile on his face. "He's broken. The system finally sees him for what he is. And the institution has no choice but to act." Alicia nodded, but her expression was measured. Breaking him isn't the goal. Systemic change is. One officer is just the beginning. The culture that allowed this must be reformed. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Tasha Freeman and Marcus Bell entered, quietly triumphant. "Ms. Monroe," Tasha said, voice filled with relief. "We watched it all unfold. What you've done, it matters. We feel safer finally. Like the system might actually work." Alicia allowed herself a faint smile, feeling the quiet weight of validation. "It's not over yet," she said gently. But today shows that accountability is possible, and that change can begin when individuals act courageously. The remainder of the day was consumed with media interviews, internal debriefings, and finalizing documentation for the DA's office. Each step reinforced the narrative. Abuse of authority has consequences, systemic negligence will be addressed, and patterns of misconduct will be documented, analyzed, and reformed. By evening, Alicia returned home, exhausted but resolute. She reflected on the months of effort, the arrest, the viral video, the painstaking documentation, the courage of witnesses, and the slow but inevitable unraveling of an officer who had once believed himself untouchable. Yet, amid the victory, there was awareness of cost. Months of emotional strain, the constant vigilance, the necessity of reliving humiliation and injustice. It had left its mark. Alicia's triumph was tempered by fatigue and the sobering knowledge that systemic reform required continual effort, vigilance, and courage from many, not just her. Her phone buzzed. Another update from Internal Affairs. Matthew's criminal inquiry was advancing, and recommendations for institutional reforms were being drafted. Public attention remained high, and the social narrative had shifted irrevocably. Accountability, once elusive, was now visible and unavoidable. Alicia allowed herself a moment of private reflection. This was what justice looked like. Not immediate, not simplistic, but deliberate, cumulative, and persistent. The officer had faced consequences, systemic negligence was exposed, and procedural reform was underway. Yet she understood the broader lesson. True justice requires ongoing vigilance, documentation, and courage from those willing to challenge power. Later that evening, as she reviewed the day's developments one last time, Alicia received a message from one of the courthouse clerks. "Thank you for standing up. It matters more than you know." Alicia smiled faintly, closing her laptop. The recognition was small but meaningful, a reminder that systemic change, while slow and arduous, impacts real lives. Every documented injustice, every witness who came forward, every procedural step taken, had a ripple effect. She looked out the window, the city lights casting reflections across her office walls. The path ahead was still long, still demanding, still fraught with potential resistance. But tonight, the system had taken a decisive step toward accountability. For Matthews, the reckoning was clear. Authority that had once been wielded without consequence was now thoroughly scrutinized. The facade of invincibility was shattered, replaced by public exposure, formal charges, and procedural accountability. For Alicia, the path forward was equally clear. Maintain vigilance, advocate for systemic reform, and ensure that every pattern of misconduct was addressed comprehensively. Justice, she reflected, was relentless, and those who misused power would ultimately face its weight. She allowed herself a final thought as she prepared for bed. Change is never easy. But persistence, truth, and courage can dismantle even the most entrenched abuses of power. Outside, the courthouse stood in quiet dignity. The steps that once carried silent authority now a stage for exposure, accountability, and the potential for real reform. And inside, Alicia Monroe rested briefly, ready for the final chapter of confrontation, resolution, and the slow, deliberate restoration of justice.